Something I've never really talked about much on this channel in the past, due to my content being mainly commentary videos, is the topic of gaming and my heavy love for video games in general. Ever since I was a young kid, around 4 to 5 years old probably, gaming itself has been a huge part of my life, whether it was on the Wii, Xbox 360, DS, Switch, etc. Hell, name any Nintendo console, and there's a good chance that I've either played on it myself or played a lot of the games from it. Gaming is, and will probably always be, something that I heavily appreciate. It's always helped me get an escape of sorts from the stuff that happens in my personal life, and as a pastime when I have nothing to do. So as a tribute of sorts to my love of gaming, I wanted to talk about many of the games that made up my childhood, some of which are just shitty licensed kids games, while some are games that I think still stand the test of time. But regardless, I'll be covering the games that matter to me personally, and I might take a few detours into other topics that are related if necessary. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video.
It's me, Mario!
Now, I'm going to be covering other Mario games other than this one, but I felt like for the sake of what I wanted to talk about, that this game deserved its own section, so let's get into it. Out of every game I could have discussed in this video, I feel like this one is the most expected for me to talk about. Even though the Nintendo 64 wasn't the biggest success in the world, and was around the time when Nintendo was beaten by Sony's PlayStation in terms of success, the impact that this game has had on the gaming industry and the childhoods of so many people can't exactly be understated, and it certainly had a big effect on me personally. I used to have the DS remake of this game, which was my first experience with the game in general, and it was pretty fun for me to play as a kid, especially as a Mario game that I had on the go whenever my family would go on vacations and such. But trying to go back to this game nowadays is just painful, mainly because of the D-pad controls, which are just awful. There's no getting around that. But regardless, I still love this game. I loved playing around with Yoshi, Luigi, Mario, Wario. I loved playing the mini games that you could unlock by catching rabbits. I just loved mostly everything about the DS version as a kid, which led me to start searching up stuff about it on the internet. Keep in mind that I was probably around 7 years old at this time, so if anything, I was lucky that I didn't get into some bad stuff back then. I probably shouldn't have been allowed to use the internet so freely, and maybe this is why I care about useless drama that doesn't matter in the end. Who knows? But to get back on track here, whenever I was searching up things online, I found out that the DS version was simply a remake, and that there was a version that I had never played before. So I begged and begged and begged my parents to get me this, and for my birthday, they got me a Wii Shop card, and I got a few games. Super Mario 64, Super Mario World, Super Mario Bros, and a few others that I don't really remember at this point. And ever since then, I've been absolutely in love with the game. In case you guys were wondering, I'm a massive Mario fan. Shocking fact, I know. Don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect game by any means. There are things like the camera controls and water levels that I have an issue with personally, but with this game, I feel like I can look past all of those completely. Maybe it's because of nostalgia, but considering how highly ranked this game is even to this day, I'd say it isn't only me that looks past these things. I love just about everything about this game. Bomb Battlefield is one of the best opening levels to any video game that I've seen. Mob's Fortress is also great. I like getting the cool mountain penguin star only to throw the stupid fucker off the edge because he annoys me. And the water levels aren't very good, but luckily there's only a few of them, and Wet Dry World is the one that I like the most. There's a lot that I like about the game, but one of the main things that I think gets overlooked usually is that it's more open than any other Mario game. Once you complete Bomb Battlefield, you can complete pretty much any other level if you have enough stars to access it, which is something I love about it. Each person playing the game can have a completely different experience with it, as while you need 120 stars to 100% the game, you only need 70 to actually get to the final boss, and that star number is lowered drastically if you count for the endless amount of glitches that are in the game. So realistically, you can play this game in whatever way that you want, and that's something that I really appreciate. It's part of why I still play this game actively even now, and it's something that really no other Mario game really got right in my opinion. Not even Odyssey, which is my favorite Mario game, so it does show how this game stands the test of time in certain ways. But with it being such an old game at this point, having been released in 1996, there were a ton of rumors surrounding it that directly ties with the nostalgia that people have with the game, and they're foggy memories of it. Some people would remember things that never existed in the game in its final release, like how to unlock Luigi. I remember trying that one as a kid since I was able to unlock Luigi in the DS version, but nothing worked. Instead, I spent minutes of my life trying to get to something that never existed in the first place. Brilliant. But to get back on track track here, because of the foggy memories people have of the game, it started one of the biggest gaming conspiracies in the past couple of years, with it all coming together in the ROM hack B3313. Now, in order for me to explain why I even put B3313 here in the first place, I want to ask a simple question. Have any of you who are watching this video ever heard of Mario 64 creepypastas, specifically the every copy is personalized ones? These creepypastas came out of nowhere after people kept misremembering certain things that they used to experience in the game as a kid, which directly ties into the themes of gaming nostalgia in this video. And because of the spotty memory of people who used to play the game when they were younger, a sort of explanation for why things they remember weren't in the game anymore popped up, and it was that every single copy of Mario 64 was personalized, and that each copy of the game is unique. This would explain why certain people remember things like hallways that never existed, characters being in the game that aren't there normally, and levels that look different than how they actually look like in the game. This isn't true, by the way. Shocking fact, I know. These theories would end up blowing up on YouTube, with videos covering it, and Mario 64 horror videos in general getting hundreds of thousands to even millions of views. And with the rise of these theories, it also caused the popularity of spooky videos about the Mario 64 beta to start getting popular, tying into the every copy is personalized creepypastas, which essentially created B3313. This ROM hack is essentially some actual beta elements in the game that were shown off in places like E3 and Space World, with some original stuff thrown in there as well. But to just describe it as that is a major disservice to the ROM hack itself. The game feels very weird to play. It's like you're playing a video game in a weird dream where absolutely nothing makes sense in it. You start off in a normal hub based on one of the beta builds of Mario 64, but as the game progresses, you essentially go through an endless maze of walkways to different parts of the castle. It's to the point where walking through the castle is longer than playing through the levels themselves. The slogan of this game should be, "You're never getting back to this section," because it's nearly impossible to entirely remember where the pathways go and where you're going. The ROM hack even leads into the creepypasta side of things, as, for example, there's this room that you can find that has faceless Marios that kill you in an instant. And there's also a chance that your castle lobby changes to only have one playable level, which is an unsettling version of Womp's Fortress. These feel like things that I'd imagine after watching videos about creepy games as a kid. And it doesn't help that everything in this game just feels wrong. The most unsettling thing about this game isn't the creepypasta elements they put in. It isn't anything that's in your face or super obvious. It's the fact that, at least to me, the game feels very familiar in a pretty unsettling way. It feels like I've seen the things in this game before, albeit in a different way. And I feel like that's why the hack feels so wrong. The hallways have similar textures and layouts of things that we've already seen from Mario 64, but it's just different and noticeable enough to make it seem off. Especially since half the hallways are just empty, with the only things inside them being doors that lead to other hallways. It makes me feel like I'm lost in some gigantic maze, but it all comes down to this. Other than the connection to the creepypasta, what does this have to do with my nostalgia for gaming exactly? Well, to put it simply, this game does give me a sense of nostalgia. I can't exactly explain why. Maybe it's because I'm remembering old dreams that I used to have, considering that a lot of the hallways feel so familiar to me. Or maybe I'm just remembering better times of when I used to play Mario 64 as a kid. But regardless of the reason, this game did give me a sense of nostalgia, a major one at that. I'll always appreciate this ROM hack. It showed me just how warped the experience playing a game that I had loved for years can be, and it's one of the reasons why I revisited Mario 64 recently. It's pretty well made, and I'd encourage anyone that is watching this segment to go check it out. It's a weird time, but it can be pretty fun depending on how you try and play it. But that's it for this section. Moving on. The fact that I haven't talked about this game in a video, besides me talking about trolling channels, is honestly pretty surprising. This game means a lot to me, so I'm not going to beat around the bush here with my opinion. I think that Minecraft is one of my favorites, if not my favorite game of all time. And to explain exactly why, let me give some context as to how I found the game in the first place, and just how much nostalgia plays into my opinion here. Back when I was around 8 to 9 years old, I started to become invested in YouTube a good bit, and through several YouTubers like Stampy, Sethling, Rage Elixir, and others, I became completely obsessed with Minecraft, so much that I felt like I just had to get the game or else I would completely lose it, which is kind of funny. So my mom got the pocket edition of the game for me and my siblings at the time, and let me just say, I spent pretty much all of my time on this when I was growing up. Yeah, the pocket edition at the time was very limited compared to the other versions of the game, but I didn't have those versions at the time, so I had no reason to care about that fact. It was still super fun to me. Half the time, I would join the few servers that were around when I got to the game as well, including Lifeboat, which is probably one of, if if not the oldest Pocket Edition server that is still running to this day, and I would mainly just play some simple games like Capture the Flag or survival games. Sometimes I would just load up a world to screw around and see how long I could survive, which usually wouldn't be that long. I wasn't good at the game. But eventually, the Pocket Edition wasn't exactly enough for me. It was too different from the versions that I was seeing on YouTube, so it led me to seek out the other versions of the game. I had gotten Minecraft for PC shortly after, in which me and my siblings all shared one account, but this version was on kind of a crappy PC that would just barely run Windows 7 on at the time, so it wasn't super ideal. Luckily though, my parents were thinking about getting me and my siblings an Xbox 360 for Christmas that year, which also had Minecraft on it. Don't worry, we didn't just get an Xbox for Minecraft or anything. That would be ridiculous. There were several games that I played on there, including Halo Reach, BattleBlock Theater, multiple COD games, but the one that stuck out to me the most was, again, Minecraft. There was something about this version that felt different at the time. Maybe it could have just been that I didn't have to play with a keyboard or touchscreen for the first time in forever, but it felt so much better to play at the time. I played this version for hours and hours on end, especially joining friends on Xbox Live in the community worlds that they would make. It's the version that really made me truly fall in love with the game, so I'll always appreciate it for that. But the one version that I'll always think about when I think about Minecraft itself is the Java version of the game. Moving past a stage in my life where I thought that a video game controller was the only way I could play games for some reason, the Java version was the one that I eventually played most of the time. Even now, I'll open the game every now and then. Maybe I'd get some mining done in the survival world to pass the time, go on a server like Hypixel to play some mini games, play with some friends while we try to survive without killing each other essentially. Granted, I could have easily done all of these things in other versions of Minecraft, so it puts up this question. What exactly makes a Java version of the game so special? And I'll answer that question pretty quickly. What makes a Java version so special to me at least is how it feels while playing the game. Every other version of Minecraft just feels off comparatively. It's hard to explain exactly what I mean here, so I'll just say this. The Windows 10 version, whether it's just general movement or how certain crafting recipes and gameplay elements work, or just how the game looks, it's just worse overall in my opinion. Or it feels worse to specify. I'll give the Windows 10 version this though. It's definitely optimized to run well. You can run this on a computer that was never meant for gaming and is pretty low quality, and still get around 30 FPS easily. The Java version runs terribly on worse computers, but that's really the only upside I see. It's so weird to me that many versions of this game, all of which are supposed to be essentially the same game in the first place, all feel so different from each other. It's one of the only games I've seen which has this issue, and most likely comes down to each version being written in different programming languages, but who knows? To conclude this section, Minecraft is one of the best games that I've ever played, and I'll always appreciate it for the amazing times I had with the game in my childhood. I honestly could not imagine a world where I didn't find this game and become incredibly attached to it, and I'll always hold the game in high regard due to that. Moving on. Now, some of you might be thinking, wow, you have a licensed kids game and a video about gaming nostalgia? Go play some real games. And to that I say, fuck you, leave me alone. I guess for me to explain exactly why I loved Simpsons Hit and Run, I should explain some context. Whenever I was growing up, The Simpsons was one of my favorite shows. I was obsessed with the show so much that one Christmas, my mom got me this thing that just moves left to right. It's supposed to be Bart Simpson as a Christmas elf singing some parody song. And this was entertainment for me as a kid. Wow, no wonder I'm so dumb now. But anyways, whenever I was young, let's say 7 to 8 years old, I had two consoles, the PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo Wii. And a little side tangent about this, I thought both of these consoles came out around the same time due to how they looked, but I found out whenever I actually learned to use the internet properly that the Wii actually came out like 6 years later, the console generation after the PlayStation 2. The Wii is just a souped up GameCube. How Nintendo got away with this at the time with the best selling console in that generation is beyond me. But let me actually get to the point here. No more side tangents, I'm sorry. Since my love for The Simpsons was so strong at that point, I guess my parents figured that I should get a video game based on the show. And man did they choose a good one to get me. This game is essentially a GTA clone in its design, only without the ability to kill people and use weapons and such. And I know that description will probably make it sound like a pretty bad game, or at least just a very watered down one with not much going for it, but it's actually pretty good for what it tries to do. For one, the controls are actually pretty good. Platforming can be kind of clunky sometimes, but that isn't much of a problem for me personally, since most of the game is driving. And speaking of driving, the controls are pretty good for this as well. It's pretty surprising that a licensed game could play this well in all honesty, and it's probably why this game is still talked about years after release. And it also helps that the game doesn't try anything that's super complicated, and keeps the missions pretty simple, but effective for the most part. For starters, most of the missions are things like collecting certain items, destroying cars, races, hitting other vehicles to collect items, etc. And while some of this might sound kind of boring, I have fun with it every time I play personally. Now, it obviously could be because of nostalgia, or that the driving in itself is already good, so it makes everything else seem better, but regardless, I think this is pretty well done. The game also has a pretty weird story as well. Essentially, wasps that were cameras for some reason start to roam around Springfield, along with black surveillance vans starting to slowly appear in the town. Homer tries to figure out who exactly is behind this, but fails miserably. Bart tries to get a copy of a video game, which essentially leads him to getting captured by aliens. But look, I'm not going to spoil the rest of this, because I'd rather you experience this yourself, but the story is pretty strange to say the least, and it's one of the things that makes the game pretty interesting to me. But honestly, me appreciating this is mainly in retrospect after playing this game again for this video. If I could be honest, as a kid, I never got past the first map or two. I think I was mainly just using the game as a sort of driving simulator and ignored the missions entirely back then. I do remember a lot of the missions from when I was younger, but once a game goes past Bart's sections in it, I don't really remember a single thing about it, at least not from whenever I used to play it. What was fun to me about the game at the time was just driving like an absolute maniac, trying to destroy random cars by hitting them into buildings or other cars, running over people only to be surprised that they somehow survived this for some reason. I mostly did everything aside from playing the main game, but regardless of how I completely ignored the main content as a kid and just did random stuff, I still had a very fun time with it, and will always appreciate it for the countless times I picked it up when I was younger. Revisiting it for this video just made me realize how much more this game had that I had completely missed, and made me respect the game a lot more. At some point, I kind of just saw it as some dumb kids game and didn't really see any reason to get it again, but once I got nostalgic, I picked it back up and realized that the game itself is actually pretty good, regardless of nostalgia affecting my opinion for this. And I think this just proves that not all licensed games based off of TV shows are bad or anything. There could be genuine effort put into a lot of these, and it shows when people still talk about these games decades after they're released, which brings me to my next section. Moving on. Now, this game is one that I have a soft spot for personally, mainly because SpongeBob is one of my favorite shows as a kid, and the fact that the remake for this game didn't exactly get what worked so well style-wise with the original game. And I'll talk about the remake later in this section, but for now, I want to focus on why this game is so special to me personally. I guess I could start off this section by talking about the show first. I'm sure many people can relate to me on this, since SpongeBob is one of the most popular cartoons that ever exist, but whenever I was a little kid, I was completely obsessed with the show. Seasons 1 through 4 were some of my favorite things to watch as a kid. Yes, I like season 4. I think it's good. And I even had almost the complete show on DVD at that point, which is around 8 seasons during the peak of me watching that show. So safe to say, I was a pretty big fan. And I'd still go back and watch some of the series even today, albeit I rarely go past the early seasons. Even with rose-tinted glasses with how much I used to enjoy the show, I just can't get into the new stuff. It's not for me. But maybe it's because I'm not in the target audience anymore. Who knows? To get back on track here though, because of my love for the show, I got many video games based on it when I was younger. A few that I can think of off the top of my head are SpongeBob's Boating Bash, Legend of the Lost Spatula, the movie game on GBA, etc. And while I was thinking about adding some of these to the video, I realized that I don't really have many memories with any of these, or really any desire to go back to them. It's not like they were all bad games, but none of them really left an impression on me. I'm sure I had fun with these then, but I kind of just saw these games as time wasters for a few minutes, and that's it. Which, to be fair, that's what most games seemed like to me when I was really young, but that was especially the case with these. But there was one game I played that I actually have a lot of fond memories of, and one that I still go back to today, decades after I first played it, and that game was Battle for Bikini Bottom. This game, along with Simpsons Hit and Run, were things that had a big impact on me when I was younger, and I think the reason for that is that these licensed games were, well, actually good. To describe exactly what Battle for Bikini Bottom is, think of a game like Mario 64, except slightly more linear and in the SpongeBob universe. To explain the plot of the game in a nutshell, Plankton creates some robots with a machine machine that he created, but he accidentally loses control of them, causing the robots to wreak havoc all across Bikini Bottom. So it's up to SpongeBob to try and stop them. There's more to the plot than this, but this is really all I feel like explaining here. So if you want to know more about it, just look it up or play the game yourself. I doubt that you really care about the story of a SpongeBob game of all things anyways. Most of this game is pretty easy for the most part, not so much to where you wouldn't have any fun with it, but enough to where a kid could easily pick this up, which, you know, was the game's target audience. Except for that ball puzzle in the Murmur Lair. I tried this as a kid and hated it, and while playing this game back for this video, I completely avoided it, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. It also has pretty good controls. The only thing I'd really change about them is maybe slightly tweaking the camera. It works fine, but sometimes it can be very awkward to use, especially if you're not just trying to move the camera left and right. The game also has most of the areas that somebody would actually want from the show, including Jellyfish Fields, Rock Bottom, the Murmur Lair, Goo Lagoon, etc. And most of them are pretty fun to play through, honestly. I had a lot of fun with this game as a kid, and I still revisit it every now and then. It's definitely not one of the best 3D platformers ever or anything, I'm not going to claim that, but for what it is, it's pretty good, and I'll always appreciate it for just being a good kids game. Now, before I end this section, I feel like I should talk about one more thing which is related to the game, and that is the remake. Just a fair warning, I'm going to be pretty negative about it, but first, let me get what I like about it out of the way. I appreciate the remake for giving Battle for Bikini Bottom a new light, instead of just being left abandoned on the PS2, GameCube, and original Xbox. Many games aren't given a second chance at all to find some new fans, or for current fans to play them on more modern hardware, leaving a lot of old stuff to become either obscure or hard to find, unless you mess around with emulation, of course. So I do appreciate this remake being made for that reason. And that's it. That's all the positives I have. To be clear, I don't hate the remake. It's essentially a one-to-one remake of the original game, down to the controls and sound effects being almost exactly the same, but I feel like what this game fails at in comparison to the original is just the overall style of everything. The original game just kind of felt like you were in an actual episode of the show. Everything about how the game looked fit in with what the actual show was going for style-wise. If there was anything to change about the game, it wouldn't be how the visuals looked, other than maybe remaking them to be a bit higher quality. So what does the remake look like? Well, have you ever seen one of those Unity Mario fan projects that people used to spread around with the text, "Nintendo hire this man," alongside it? Yeah, this unironically looks like one of those projects. The colors look way too bright, the SpongeBob model looks worse than the GameCube version, and the whole game doesn't feel stylized to make you feel like you're in the show anymore. I don't think it looks bad necessarily, I think it looks fine, but the original game nailed the style of the show, so the style of the remake just feels very off to me. Now granted, I do have a heavy amount of nostalgia for the original game, so take my opinion here with a grain of salt, but this remake just isn't for me, and takes away a lot of the charm of why I like the game. But you know what? I'm glad it exists, even if I don't personally like what they did with it. Battle for Bikini Bottom will always be one of my favorite games. Not because it's one of the best games ever made or something. If you look at it with a critical lens, it's clearly not that, but I appreciate it a lot due to my personal attachment to the show, and how much I used to play this when I was younger. I know I say that a lot about these games, that I like them because I used to play them when I was a kid, so sorry if this gets repetitive, but I really can't help it at this point. Almost all of the games I talk about here are ones I cherish from my childhood. It's just more personal, and with this one, it's no exception. But that's about it for this section. Moving on. Now, I wanted to put a game on here that I played a lot during my era of playing the Xbox 360, and for me, it was between two choices, Super Meat Boy and BattleBlock Theater. And while I loved playing Super Meat Boy personally, don't get me wrong, I just had a lot more fun playing BattleBlock Theater, and it's also a way less infuriating game, so I just picked that one. And for anybody wondering why I didn't just put both on here, this video is getting long enough as it is. Just look at how long my script is, and you can understand why I decided to cut one of them. But anyways, in order to explain exactly why this game means a lot to me, I want to talk about the whole era of gaming that I think of whenever this game comes to mind. In 2014, I was about 9 to 10 years old and was just starting to become active on some parts of the internet, with the thing I was the most active on being Xbox Live. Looking past the fact that I 100% shouldn't have been using this when I was 9 years old, Xbox Live was something that I found to be pretty interesting and fun when I was younger. Due to online voice chats and multiplayer, it was super easy to meet people at the time, and I became friends with a lot of people online. Some good, some bad, some in between, but it was overall a good experience. It could have been far worse. And because of this experience I had in Xbox Live, it led me to finding certain games to play through word of mouth alone, which is how I found games like Super Meat Boy and BattleBlock Theater. They were both free at the time, so I figured why not, and downloaded them both, and to say that they were good games would be an understatement. But for this section, I'm going to focus on just BattleBlock Theater. Essentially, the game is a 2D platformer, and the objective for most of the levels is to collect as many gems as you can while navigating the level, and going through the exit. And the way that the game pulled this off is pretty cool to me, to say the least. For starters, I really like the art style that the game went for. Everything from this game looks like something that I would have found on Newgrounds years ago, and I mean that in a good way. From how the characters look to the designs of the level gimmicks and enemies, it's just all very charming, and I couldn't imagine this game without it looking like this. The presentation for the story in this game is also something that I like a lot. I'll admit that when I was younger, I didn't really pay attention to the story much. I was too focused on mainly playing the game and skipped through the cutscenes a lot of the time. But going back to the game recently gave me sort of a newfound appreciation for it. The whole story is presented as a stage production essentially, and that style could have easily turned into something that was incredibly unfunny or cringy. And this game could have become forgettable pretty quickly, but the cutscenes have a narrator in them, and he steals the whole show without even trying. Everything about this story sounds like the narrator was just making up wild things on the fly, or recording his lines for each scene in one take. And his absolute enthusiasm for telling this whole story is just pretty funny to me. I'd recommend after watching this video for you to go check out either the game or just the cutscenes themselves. Trust me, it'll be worth it. Something else I like about the game is the music and overall sound design. The music I'm using currently for this section of the video is from the game, by the way, and I just find all of it to be pretty charming. I have the song that plays when you open the game just stuck in my head at random times, especially as I'm editing this. While looking for music to use, I found a 15-minute extended version of it, and I listened to the entire thing before downloading it. Yep, this is how I spend my time. I feel like the music fits perfectly with what the game is trying to go for, and I really couldn't imagine anything else replacing it. But who knows? Maybe it's just because I'm biased and I've only ever played the game with its current soundtrack, but I like it a lot personally. The last thing I want to talk about is just the overall gameplay itself. How I'd describe the game is that it's a pretty simple 2D platformer with enough new gimmicks and ideas to keep the whole thing interesting as you go through the game. The level designs are pretty good, and so are the controls, although some of the enemies in these levels can be pretty annoying at times if you don't just kill them immediately and just leave them be. That's not really an issue with the game though, that's just a me thing. It's rare that I go back to a game that I played whenever I was 9 or 10 years old and still enjoy it about as much as I did back then. Going back to this game made me pretty happy, to say the least, because it confirmed that me liking this game back then wasn't just me being some dumb kid without standards. Not that I did have standards, I played some pretty bad games back then, but still. Nostalgia does affect my opinion here a decent bit, sure. It affects my opinion significantly for everything I talked about here, in fact. But looking past all of that, I don't really have any major issues with the game, and find it to be a pretty charming 2D platformer with a cool story and a nice aesthetic. I'm glad I grew up with this, and I'm glad that I can appreciate it just as much as I used to when looking back on it now. Moving on. This section is the one that would be the most personal to me, which is an accomplishment in itself considering that this entire video is about gaming nostalgia. And this is because the Mario series is the thing that introduced me into gaming in general. And if I had not been introduced to it, I don't know if I would be into gaming as much as I am currently. So with this in mind, what I want to do for this section is just to document my experience with the series over the time I've played it. A lot of this will be pretty brief, but keep in mind that I'm trying to cram my experience with an entire series into this one section, so bear with me here. For anyone curious, by the way, here's a tier list for every mainline Mario game that I've played. Feel free to argue or agree with me in the comments, but anyways. I guess to start off, I should talk about the first ever gaming system that I ever had, which was the Nintendo DS. With it being the second best selling game console of all time, I'm sure that a lot of people first experienced gaming through this thing, and I was no exception. There were a lot of games that I discovered through playing this thing, whether it was the Mario Kart series, Sonic, Kirby, etc. But the game that I remember the most on the DS is New Super Mario Bros. I'm gonna keep this brief because I have a lot of stuff to talk about here, but this was the first game I remember playing, and to this day, this is one of my favorite Mario games. I've played the other New Super games, but what makes this one different from the rest is just how unique it is, and the context of when it was released. When this came out, there hadn't been a new Mario 2D platformer in more than a decade, and the New Super Mario series hadn't run its course yet. So this was pretty fresh when it came out, and almost 20 years later, it's still the standout game in that series. And that led me to becoming obsessed with Mario in general. Throughout my life, I've played just about every Mario game that you could consider mainline, and the only one that wasn't something I played when I was a lot younger was Sunshine, which by coincidence is also the 3D Mario game that I'm the most critical of personally, so that might have something to do with it. But moving past how I feel about Sunshine and a couple of other games, most of the series is stuff that I love and always will appreciate, especially the games on the Wii and later. Super Mario Galaxy is one of my favorite games of all time, and I 100% think that's due to me being majorly biased, but I also think that the game is pretty great even with that put to the side. Galaxy 2 was also great, but I'll be honest, I kind of just forget about it a lot of the time due to the way the first game went about things, with it being way more memorable. But both Galaxy 1 and 2 are some of the best games I played at the time, and I'd argue that they still hold up years later. I do have a favorite Mario game above these though, and I'll get into that later. New Super Mario Bros. Wii was also a game I appreciated when I was younger, but I've grown less fond of as time passes. It's still a decent game, but the art style worked way better on the DS and just looked kind of boring here, and the rest of the new Super games after this are just unneeded and kind of trash, so there's that. I also played every NES Mario game on the Wii, which consisted of Mario 1, 2, 3, The Lost Levels, as well as some SNES games, one of which I'll mention as a standout is obviously Mario World. This will forever be my favorite 2D platformer in the series, and it's not even close. I played this one as a kid a lot, and I did like it a decent bit, but it has grown on me so much over the years, and it is still something that I pick up and play every now and then. Not to mention that stuff like speedrunning made me heavily invested in picking up Mario World, and Mario 1 specifically back up, with people like Summoning Salt, Cosmic, and Carl Jobst all making great videos that gave me a bit of insight into speedrunning in general, and how broken these games would get as well. But moving past the Wii era, I want to talk about two games specifically, Super Mario Odyssey and Wonder, one of which feels weird to me because Mario Odyssey came out in 2017, that's not even a decade ago, and yet I feel weirdly nostalgic for this game even still. And Wonder, although I have no nostalgia for it, is still a great game, so I thought I should mention it. To start off here, Super Mario Odyssey is my favorite Mario game. Galaxy is only slightly behind here, and I think both of them are really close in quality, but Odyssey beats it for me. I think what I like a lot about it is the main thing that the game is focused on, the capture gimmick. I like that you're able to turn into enemies and other things just by throwing your cap at stuff. It makes for some pretty interesting gameplay, and the game would not be as good without it. The controls are also the best in a Mario game has ever had. They're just really fluent and tight. Platforming feels really satisfying here for me. I could go on and on about this game, so I'll just sum it up quickly. The graphics, soundtrack, game gimmicks, controls, and just about everything in this game is something that I love. Apart from maybe how many moons are in the game, but that's about my only issue. I love this game, and I'll continue to appreciate it as time goes on. But moving on from that, let's talk about Wonder, because even though it's a pretty recent game, only coming out about a couple of months ago from the time of me recording this, it's proven to be a pretty interesting game in its own right. If I can say anything about it, it's that the style is the main thing that makes it unique. I love how everything looks in the game. It feels refreshing after getting 4 2D platformers that were all essentially just the same exact style over and over again. The controls are really good and are the best that a 2D platformer Mario game has gotten. I like a lot of the gimmicks that they would throw in there as well to shake things up and make it more interesting. Badges are a big part of the game. They allow Mario to do different moves depending on which one you have equipped, which I think is pretty cool. And that's about it. I like Mario Wonder a lot as a game currently, and I'll see over the next few years if I forget about it or if it'll become a personal favorite of mine. Who knows? But overall, the Mario series in general will forever be my most loved series. Is it because I'm biased? Yes. Is it because I was a big Nintendo fan growing up? Yes. But still, these are all games that I will always get a kick out of, and even the worst games in the series are at least decently designed. But that's about all I have to say for this section. Moving on. So I bet that after this 20 to 30 minute video, you might be thinking to yourself, was it really necessary to spend that much time talking about games of all things when you normally just make commentary videos? Well, to put it as simply as I can, I thought it would be interesting to do something other than just covering whatever drama topics interest me every few weeks. As much as certain controversies and situations do interest me, that stuff can get pretty draining sometimes, especially if there is nothing going on except for something dumb throughout the week. Don't get me wrong, I still like making commentary content and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon, but for me, I'm just glad that I was finally able to talk about something that is more personal to me. These games are things I grew up with and cherish as major parts of my childhood. So for people to watch this video and give it support, whether it's a lot, less than usual, or anywhere in between, is appreciated to say the least. And I don't plan on stopping making videos like this one. Speaking of videos, this one has one more purpose than just being an outlet for me to speak my mind about video games. Me and one of my friends are starting a gaming channel, and the first video on there should be out at the same time that this is uploaded, so I thought that this would be be a cool upload to tie into that project as well. If you want to support it, I'll have our first video linked in the description, so go check that out if you want. I also have the rest of my links in the description, so check those out too. And that's about it for me. I'll see you in the next video. Oh yeah, one last thing. #FLM.